We're with Andrea Dilley today, and this topic, Andrea, she's with us today via Skype from her home in Austin, Texas, and she's authored a book, Faith in Other Flat Tires. And here at the Dove Radio and TV, Andrea, we get a lot of calls and emails and letters and drop-ins. And I got to tell you that the topic that you're sharing with us today is probably one of the big ones that we hear that people are struggling with. A child that has wandered away, parents that are trying to figure out what to do. I've often asked the question, what happens to a child? They're raised in a beautiful home, and we send them out the door one day, and we come back, and the enemy's living upstairs. They're locked in and shut down. What happened? Yours happened a little bit later, the college years, and I think a lot of parents really fear that, even though if they're going to a Christian college, that atmosphere, as you know, can be quite inducing, and this is what maybe has happened to you. A couple things that you mentioned previously. Let me ask you this, first of all. Did your doubt ever turn to despair?
That's a great question, Perry. I would say there were moments of despair, and those come out in the book. I had moments when after I had left the church, I had separated myself from community. I was churchless, lonely, and I did experience, moments of despair. But in terms of my doubt turning into despair, I would actually say the opposite, Perry, and it sounds counterintuitive, but my doubt in some ways was actually part of my longing for God. Frederick Buechner says faith is homesickness. C.S. Lewis called it, Sehnsucht, longing for this far-off country. And I think for me, doubt was actually something that was born out of disappointment with the way things were. And my disappointment with the way things were was actually part of longing for something better, longing for God, that imprint, the imago Dei in me. So if you kind of follow that trail, my doubt was actually part of my longing for God. And in that sense, it was something that turned me back to God rather than to despair.
The whole atmosphere of higher education and in the world of academics is to create the environment for what they call critical thinking. You begin to question a lot of things. Obviously, you begin to question your faith. You came up with the fact that you were frustrated that God would allow bad things to happen to good people, or that there would be such suffering in the world. How did you finally process that?
That's a great question, Perry. Yeah, I really had some profound experiences, both as a young person growing up and as a young adult, working in refugee camps, working with welfare families. One experience in particular, working at in some slums in Nairobi, was really significant for me. I just had this moment of how is this possible? How do I believe? And that was very pivotal for me in leaving the church. But there were a couple things, Perry, that helped me sort through that problem. I don't think there's a definitive answer. I think suffering is something that's very complex. But my first epiphany, if you want to call it that, had to do with the problem of good, the opposite problem. How do I make sense of all the goodness and beauty in the world? If I kind of push back against the darkness and I react against the injustice and the suffering and the pain, I also have to ask that counter question. Where does the goodness come from? And I think if you're, for me, even if you're just a theist, that question leads back to God. So that was one aspect of it in terms of kind of trying to make sense of the problem of suffering. And the other answer, Perry, is that other worldviews were dissatisfying to me. The Buddhist worldview says suffering is just displacement of desire. The naturalist worldview says we're just animals competing for space and resources. There is no such thing as injustice. You can't even call something evil. So in that sense, coming back to the church had as much to do with dissatisfaction with the alternatives, if that makes sense,
sure,
as it had to do with embracing Christianity itself. I just kind of realized, wow, Christianity is the only faith that actually takes suffering really seriously. Christ on the cross. I mean, there's so much of the Christian faith that is wrapped up in issues and questions of suffering, and we still might have unanswered questions, and I think that's okay, and that's part of what I come to in the book.
What happened? At what point did you begin to turn this thing around? Because I think as you begin to leave the faith in your journey in this world of unknown, and then you wake up and say, the faith was the right way, you kind of have one foot in it and one foot out of it, and you kind of convince yourself of the lie, I can balance this for a while, It's kind of like one foot on the boat and one foot on the dock. Sooner or later, it drifts apart, and you got to make a jump. And you jumped into the world for a while, but it didn't add up. You began to. Was it a head thing? Was it a heart thing? At what point did it go from your head to your heart?
It's a great question, Perry. Yeah, as I said, I think part of my return to the church had to do with my dissatisfaction with churchlessness, with faithlessness. I had to leave the church to find the church. And that's not true of everyone. But, in living outside of the church, living outside of Christian community, I was literally hanging out in bars with people who didn't talk about God, let alone faith, let alone the Christian faith. All of that was it was miles from my mind. And I think after a while, I realized, wait a second, these questions matter to me. Even questions, existential questions, spiritual questions. I think I actually want to be in community where I can ask these questions, where I can struggle with questions of faith. And in that sense, again, my dissatisfaction had everything to do with my return to church. Some people have what I would call kind of a positive reconversion. Mm-hmm. Mine was kind of a negative reconversion in the sense that I was just so disillusioned with the alternative and living in this secular lifestyle and realizing, wait, my heart feels empty. I want to be back in the space of the sanctuary. I want to be back inside faith community that can help me think through my questions and my doubts.
Two things here before we run out of time. One is, I guess the rudimentary of faith and church became boring. Is that what happened? Or at least it became rudimentary? It was the same old thing all the time?
You mean in terms of kind of my experience of church? Is that what you're...
Yeah, before you drifted, yeah.
Sure, in part, yeah. As I said, eating a turkey sandwich every day, you kind of get a little bored. you get a little antsy. You want to get out and figure out what else is out there to experience. So yeah, that was definitely part of my departure too. Was just kind of
the other question, Andrea, is the danger of what you did. Because what I don't want people to do is say, yeah, I can run out and flirt with this thing for a couple of years and come back. I mean, if I was the devil, that's what I'd be saying to a lot of people right now. How dangerous was it when you were out there?
It's a great question, Perry. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful issue to bring up because, again, I was protected in some ways from some of the more severe experiences that people have in terms of, doing high-end drugs, sleeping around, those kinds of things, getting pregnant out of wedlock. I didn't have those kinds of experiences. I had what I would call sort of mild rebellion, but it was still rebellion and it was still exploration on my part. But absolutely, it's a risk. You have to be careful. Guard your heart.
Well, Andrea, thank you. What a delight. Can we get you back?
Absolutely. I would love it.
This is absolutely fascinating, and I can't help but think your book's going to minister to thousands. And let me encourage people, if you have a wayward student in your home, you're a parent and you're worrying about this issue, there's much to learn from Faith and Other Flat Tires by Andrea Dilley. Let me encourage you to get a copy of the book at the bookstores. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, online. And let this be a tremendous resource for you and your student in your life. Andrea, thank you. God bless you. Great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Perry. It was wonderful.
Okay.